Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 66 of the Nurtured by Nature podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined in conversation by Ryan, author of the recently published book Wild NYC, experiencing the amazing nature in and around New York City. When we think of viewing wildlife and immersing ourselves in nature, most of us probably are guilty of imagining far-off wilderness destinations. But Ryan is a passionate advocate for exploring and appreciating the incredible diversity of nature that can be found in the urban environment, and in particular, the nature that he lives alongside in New York City. Ryan reminds us that urban areas were often chosen for their rich abundance of natural features that would have benefited wildlife as much as the humans that were also drawn to these areas. His book shares the rich history of NYC, from the indigenous cultures that first started to shape the landscape, through the colonialist times to the modern city that we know today. We discuss how connecting more with nature has enriched his life in numerous unexpected ways, finding connection and community in an often isolating city existence. So even if you're a complete beginner, with the availability of numerous apps like iNaturalist and the Merlin Bird app, plus incredible online communities, there has never been a better time to become a naturalist and to simply start on your own street or patch and begin observing the natural world, whether that is birds, mammals, wildflowers, butterflies and moths, and even fungi and lichens. The first step is to slow down and look a little closer at what you might have initially thought was a weedy mess, because there are untold secrets to be revealed, from ravens nesting on the Brooklyn Bridge to humpback whales offshore and even mountain ferns on the side of a railway viaduct. As we begin to recognise and then appreciate the amazing nature on our doorsteps, we likely become advocates for our natural heritage, and this ripples out into the world in untold ways, often catalysing social justice movements as well as environmental change. Welcome, Ryan, and thank you so much for joining us today on the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I'm really looking forward to talking to you and sharing about your exciting new book that's just launched, Wild NYC, isn't it? New York City, but NYC for short. And but to get us started, I always just ask my guests to share a little bit about their nature story. So that can just be any sort of memories of your time in nature or how your relationship with nature has evolved over your life. So if there's something you'd like to share to get us started, that'd be lovely.
Sure. So I am from just a town that touches New York City. So basically New York City with my parents are New Yorkers. And, I was raised as somebody who was aware, but not totally into nature. I definitely thought that, pigeons were rats with wings and that seagulls were evil. But I'm a writer by training. And during my writing program, I did I found a story that our local bird conservation organization, New York City Bird Alliance, was painting lawn flamingos white in order to help attract egrets back
Oh,
to
okay.
some habitat, which I thought was so silly and interesting and
Yeah.
exactly my kind of story. So I wanted to try and find herons and egrets on my own. So I went all the way out to kind of the furthest outskirts marsh of New York City, and I didn't know what I was looking for, and I totally struck out, and I was all grumpy about it. And so I reached out to somebody and I was like, "Help, I can't find any herons or egrets in New York City. I need them for my story." And then she was an educator and a naturalist in the city, and she was like, "Oh, well, don't go there." And then she took me to this like kind of just regular New York City park in Staten Island, and just in the middle of a bunch of houses. And then she's like, "The herons, they're nesting in that tree over there."
Oh, wow.
And I was just so blown away that this like crazy dinosaur-shaped bird was just nesting in the middle of this random park, and I didn't have to walk very far to see it, and I didn't, it was amazing. And I think from there, I really started noticing things. But and then my now spouse is a from rural Minnesota, and when they moved to New York, we needed a couples hobby, and I was bird interested, and they're bird interested, so we took up bird watching, and it's all exploded since then. Once you start looking at a bird, you start looking at bugs, and you start looking at trees, and you start looking at mammals, and then all of a sudden everything is something interesting to look at.
Yeah, I love that. I'm a bit of a secret birder myself. I was fortunate enough to spend several years living in Africa, so absolutely spoilt for birds to look at. And it's just, I think it's a great way to slow down as well, isn't it? When you're looking for birds, you have to be quite present. It brings in all your senses. You're listening for them and looking for movement, and it's just a fantastic way to sort of take a bit of a breather and a break from our hectic busy lives that we lead now.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a very, very immersive hobby, and it requires you to be totally present and, clear of mind if you can be. And surprisingly, it is a hobby that is extremely good in New York City. We are honestly quite privileged with the sheer diversity of birds that we get to experience in the city every year. Something that people might not realize, but, it's actually a destination for many bird watchers.
Yeah, I was fascinated reading your book. I'll confess now that I've never actually been to New York City myself. So I was reading your lovely new book, and it was really I felt like I got to explore it with you, which was really lovely as well. So it was like I felt like I was just uncovering this amazing place, and it really shocked me because it is like it's the most populous city in the US, I think you say in your book, and it's like I think you said it's like 300 square miles as well, so it's quite a vast place, and it was just fascinating to read about this kind of whole. It's sort of like a melting pot because you're on the transition of various like climate zones, and you've also got like this huge diversity of ecotones as well with the marine environment and the river environment and these separate islands, and it was fascinating. I was really just amazed to learn how much diversity there is there.
Yeah, you've nailed it. I mean, New York City has, like you said, we straddle two climate zones, so subtropical climate and subcontinental climate. And we actually see species from both of those climate zones. So stuff that's expected further south, stuff that's expected further north, land and sea, river and ocean, saltwater, freshwater. Even the rock, we have simultaneously some of the oldest and some of the youngest rock in the United States. And, all of that is. New York has been like an incredibly biodiverse place, even before, it was a major city. Was a, place where migratory birds would stop over, migratory sea creatures, and it attracted human beings. I mean, it's been a place where humans have lived and have actually been altering the habitat for millennia. So, it is interesting because obviously this lush biodiversity is what attracted people to the city in the first place, and of
Yeah.
course why people chose to colonize it and make it New York City as opposed to a place where indigenous people lived. But it's a shame because in then doing so they sort of stripped the city of a lot of why they had decided to live there in the
Yeah.
first place. So a lot of it is remnants of what it once was, but it still maintains quite a lot of that diversity even despite all the concrete.
Yeah, I think that's the fascinating thing about our urban landscape, isn't it? Is actually it is very heavily shaped by humans, and yet we're also sort of getting to a stage of our, I suppose, development as a society where we're actually looking at how we could shape it more for nature, where before we were sort of like, progress at all costs and just thinking about what people needed, and now we're starting to move back away from that. And it's just one of the things I loved about your book actually is it starts with your sort of section one, and you give this fantastic sort of history of New York and how it's developed. And I like the fact that you included in that like the indigenous people of the region and how their cultures were impacted, and it sort of is a fascinating history. And I think history is important, isn't it, to understand where we've come from as well, so that we can look forward to where we're going to as well.
Absolutely. And, the inclusion of so much indigenous history was really intentional on my part. I mean, not only because they're the folks who were here, this is indigenous land, but
Yeah.
I mean, I'm really trying to emphasize that the city has had people living in harmony with wildlife for a very long time. So it's not surprising that somebody would walk around New York City and appreciate all this wildlife. The indigenous folks who lived here, they weren't just living on the land. They were industrious. They were farming and clearing land with fire. And, them being here they were creating savannas, for example, that made habitat for grassland birds that would have lived in the city and grassland animals. I mean, even like the American bison, right? Its range would have been all the way to the eastern United States, and it's very possible that some of them would have been in the New York City area, probably on account of the indigenous folks who lived here. So it's not a crazy thing to say, well, if New York has always had this sort of human wildlife connection, we can continue that trend today. And there's no reason that we can't live, in a place where humans are living and in huge numbers. Of course, I expect humans to continue living in New York, but that we could still make it a place where there's also an incredible biodiversity.
Well, and I think what's really interesting as well, and kind of gives us hope as well, is that nature has kind of hung on in that space as well. Like, you've had these like thousands of years of human interaction and development, and yet it still is able to have this rich diversity of wildlife that still lives and thrives there, which is also exciting that it is still there. It's not bringing something back that's gone completely. It's moving forward to nurture the spaces and make sure that it continues to support this wildlife going forward.
Well, and I mean, a lot of this wildlife, what happens is if you create a habitat and you maintain it, then the things that belong in that habitat will be there. Especially, if there's a way for it to get there, like a bird,
Yeah.
and or a plant. So we create these assemblages, and if we maintain them and protect them, and do our best to undo the human impacts or the bad negative human impacts, and if we want something to be there, then we could have it there. And this is something that I always tell my friends when we're talking about conservation is that like humans actually do have the potential to make a habitat kind of a pristine biodiverse habitat if we really want it to be. If somebody wants there to be ducks and bald eagles around, we have legislation in the United States that brought some of these species back from the brink because people wanted them there. They want there to be eagles here. Duck hunters wanted there to be ducks around to shoot. And when you really care about an animal, you could have it there. It takes money and it takes effort, but we have to do those things. And so there's not only are we, animals living here in harmony with us, but by moving to these places, we have to be stewards of them as well.
Yeah, I think that's really important is realizing, and it goes back to your mentioning of the indigenous cultures, is that they were much better at stewarding the land and their relationships with it than our later cultures have been. And there is this, I think in more recent years, this real rise of actually realizing that we have always been sort of architects of the world we live in, and there is very few places on the world that are like, this sort of idyllic picture of pristine wilderness that has never been touched by human hand. And actually it's coming to the realization that we need to be co-creating with nature and be responsible for our role in the impact we have on it and how we can be more responsible in that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, humans are landscape architects, and when we discovered fire and agriculture, we were very quick to use it to totally alter these habitats. And it's always an interesting question, right? When you're talking about conservation and what do you want the land to look like, do you want it to look like what it looked like without humans, or what it looked like with humans, or even when you talk about what species are in decline, I mean, are they in decline since before colonization, or are they in decline since after colonization, right? Are they a species that exploded in the United States, for example, right? Like agriculture, kind of changed in the 1700s, 1800s when European colonists moved in. So when they moved in, there was a lot more grassland habitat and a lot more grassland birds, right? Savanna type birds. And now as we move towards like big, you know, monocultural agribusiness, we don't
Yeah.
see as much of that
Yeah.
anymore. And so but what's the world we want? And these are tough questions. I certainly am not the person who will be able to answer them. But I just hope that we work to build a world that's super biodiverse, that we have lots of animals and clean air and aren't getting struck by natural disasters that are ultimately a cause of our own, not
Yeah.
caring for the environment.
Yeah, I think it's a really good sort of question to sort of for everyone to ponder, isn't it? Is to consider actually how we want to shape the world. And there's often talk in the sort of conservation communities of the shifting baseline syndrome of, like, what was common for our parents is not common for us and our children. And so therefore what do you take as that snapshot in time? But it is just a question to consider and to think about, which perhaps doesn't have an answer, and that's all right. And it's just, it's just something to be aware of as we're making decisions and moving forward. But I love that in your book you do include some of what are non-native species, because they are quite prevalent in the city environment in particular. Well, anywhere where people have been, really, aren't they? Because we have imported them either intentionally for sort of horticultural or garden reasons, or unintentionally as sort of they've come as stowaways on other imports to our environment. And you had, I think you had quite a nice approach in your book of how you included them rather than some naturalists who would be quite, immediately exclude them from everything.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that when you're going outside, you want to be wowed by all the amazing native wildlife and all of the good wildlife, but it just doesn't work that way here. When I go outside and walk through the park, a big percentage of the things I see are not native species. And it wouldn't be true to the New York City's naturalist experience if I left like mugwort or pigeon out. It's like those are what you see. And I think the important part for me is that as much as like I want people to be out and appreciating the amazing parts of nature, what I really want is for them to be fully informed of the kinds of things we have, so that and understand how these play into the overarching landscape here. So, for example, it's like rats and pigeons are a major proportion of the diet of our native birds of prey in New York City, right? Like pigeons are, I mean, peregrine falcons, which are, pretty common here. We see them pretty often. They nest in the main downtown areas of the city. Their main prey is the pigeon. They're recreating this sort of cliffside ecosystem that was around, for a long time. So peregrines and pigeons, or red-tailed hawks, they eat rats, and so you have to be aware of these invasive and introduced species, because if you, for example, do some sort of rat eradication program and lay out a ton of rat poison, and you don't think of the rats as being a part of the ecosystem, you may unintentionally be poisoning our native raptors. And the same goes with the plants. That's kind of on the flip side. You might find some beautiful plant you want to plant in your backyard, but not realize that it's like could be the potential cause of an immense amount of biodiversity loss when it inevitably like unrolls like a carpet across the native forests.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think and some of them are charming. Starlings are charming, and monk parakeets are charming, and I like looking at them. And so I think people just need to know everything. We shouldn't be selective of what we get to see and what we don't get to see.
Yeah, I think I had a lovely conversation a little bit earlier in the year with a lady who's written another book called Bad Naturalist, and she talks about quite a lot of the invasive species in the area that she's trying to rehabilitate in West Virginia. And one of them, which you mentioned as well, is it the Tree of Heaven? And she has we have quite a detailed conversation about how this is, like the kind of Day of the Triffid kind of plant, and it's got all of these amazing adaptations, but at the same time, unfortunately, it's an invasive species that doesn't support native wildlife and has this incredible capacity to like spread and propagate in a way that the native species can't really compete with. But it's just I love you talking about like the animals that are thriving in the urban environment, because I live in a rural environment, and sometimes it's actually quite hard for wildlife in this environment as well. We have intensive agriculture, and they have, also different threats, but still threats to their struggling sort of survival. And I know one of the species that you mentioned was ravens, and that kind of caught my eye because actually in the last couple of years we've had ravens appear in our local area, and it's been quite a sort of special thing to see them and hear them, and it is just it's just exciting. I find it exciting as well when you start to like be aware of your like kind of local patch, whether that's in an urban area or in a rural area, and you sort of begin to the players that are normally there, but then when you see something new, it's really quite exciting, isn't it?
Ravens are, yeah, I totally agree with you. Ravens are also such an interesting one here in New York. So I don't, with in terms of how I selected the species in this book, it's kind of a hard decision, right? Because I mean, there's like 6,000 different species
Yeah.
of plant and animal in the city. And so I tried to whittle it down that in some cases I would pick the most common. But in cases where there was also something closely related that was super interesting, I would pick that instead. So
Yeah.
ravens, it's not the most common corvid, right? We have plenty of blue jays and crows, and we have two species of crow here in New York City. But, they have this fascinating return to the city. I mean, even 10 years ago, if you said that you were seeing ravens regularly in New York City, people would sort of doubt your bird watching ability. They'd say,
Yeah.
oh,
Yeah.
maybe you're confused. But today, perhaps as a result of crow populations dropping, in the mid 2000s from West Nile virus, or perhaps something else, ravens have made this crazy reintroduction into New York City where, in the 1970s, it was a bird that you had to go to like a single mountain in very far rural New York
Yeah.
mountainous regions and
Yeah.
and hopefully you'd see one in the distance. And now, I mean, they nest on the Brooklyn Bridge,
Yeah.
like the most
Wow.
iconic bridge in New York City. There's a raven nest there, and they nest in all five boroughs, and you hear them rah rah like
Yeah.
you create
Yeah.
just and it's just this very these are the kinds of stories that we get to experience here in New York City of just, animals, they start to figure out that the city can provide, either cover for them or it's unclear sometimes why they choose to do it, but they end up just breeding here. And then sometimes we see them with higher frequency than you might see outside of the city in certain cases.
Yeah, yeah, I know some of my friends here that live in urban areas, they definitely see certain wildlife far more frequently, and it's actually quite often more relaxed around people as well because it's become sort of more habituated to just coexisting in a much closer proximity to people, so you can have some really phenomenal encounters with wildlife in the urban environment. And the thing I loved about how you presented your book, though, is you kind of came to nature in later life, and how I think you said like it's quite easy nowadays to go from like novice to naturalist in sort of a relatively short time because there's so many resources that are available now, and you share some of those in your book of things that have really helped you kind of gain in your understanding and help you identify the animals and birds and insects that you're seeing in your local environment.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, when I first started out, first of all, I actually don't profess to be an expert in nature and wildlife. Rather, I'm a very observant person who knows how to use the tools that we have at hand. And okay, so I started about 10 years ago is when I started really seriously learning all of the species in the New York City area, and it was all because of the incredible availability of knowledge that we have at our fingertips now. My favorite apps, iNaturalist, for those, I'm sure it comes up frequently on this show, but it is just such a wonderful resource that, of course, there's the AI component. Say what you will about AI, the fact that you could use it to identify any species that you can find out is really magical. But what I find so amazing about iNaturalist is that after you've submitted your species, there are just hundreds and hundreds of other naturalists who are experts in their field. And so you've used you use iNaturalist to identify a species, and
Yeah.
then somebody who might have discovered the species or be a total expert in the species will come and confirm what you've seen. And, if it was something interesting, give you some context or ask you questions. And, you're really able to interact with other humans in the community of naturalists and kind of gain their knowledge. So obviously, I'm totally indebted to the experts of iNaturalist and the users of the app. And then, of course, the other one is Merlin and eBird, and Cornell University Lab of Ornithology is just doing such a really awesome job of
Yeah.
spreading the gospel of birding and bird
Yeah.
watching and offering some of the most incredible tools that, really quickly you could get a handle of, what might have taken a mentor before, like what birds are here, when do these birds show up, what's common in which area, what's rare. And now all of that stuff is so easy to figure out just by looking at the amazing data tools that eBird offers. And even just learning what the birds are, of course, it's not 100% accurate, but they'll tell you what you're hearing, bird song. They can upload a blurry photo and it's often accurate. So, um, and then there's plenty of other, online communities that have been super valuable to me, even on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, wherever. There's just so many other naturalists who now are all sharing their sightings and offering help when you're trying to identify things or offering writing and information. So there's really never been a better time to become a naturalist and begin observing the natural environment.
Yeah, I love that. We use the Merlin app quite a lot as well, and I think I found it really useful because I'm quite a like visual learner. So when I sort of you can hear the songs and it then says, oh, it shows you the picture, and I've actually been able to learn more bird songs because it will show me the picture of it, whereas before I'd have to be sort of like, oh, I don't know what that is, and then you'd have to hope that you could see it with your binoculars and then you'd be able to sort of put it together, whereas I've actually found that I've been able to learn the bird songs and then recall them with much more ease using the Merlin app than I had previously. So it's a really fantastic tool, and I love iNaturalist as well. And like you say, it's the other really good thing about a lot of these apps is they feed into this kind of citizen science thing as well, where you're providing data to environmentalists, conservation organizations, things that are interested in helping preserve the natural world and conserve it, and you're providing data to them as well. So you actually become a sort of conservationist on the ground for these numerous organizations that use the data that you're providing. So it has this like kind of brilliant like double edge of win-win for A, you can learn, and B, you're also helping the nature and the wildlife as well in turn.
I mean, absolutely. Of course, there's plenty of these iNaturalist like BioBlitz events where they'll go out and have people spot as much as they can. But also, I've noticed, especially here in New York City, because of all of the international commerce, New York is often the sort of first place that some new species might show up in the United States, and they'll
Yeah.
spread from the city. And a user of iNaturalist might be the first person to uncover what could one day become sort of a major conservation issue, right? Like there
Yeah.
have been times where I'll take a picture of, a moth or some, beetle or something I see, and it'll be the first time that this insect has ever been seen in New York City. And it makes you ask, like, okay, well, what's next? Is this going to be an incidental thing that just showed up, or is this going to be a big invasive threat one day? And by uploading that to iNaturalist, it kind of helps people who are studying these species understand how these species first showed up, when, and trace them so that they can, make conservation decisions. So it's really an important app and an important tool, and super useful to just at all times know what animals are where and when. It's just amazing.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about like diversity in the natural world, but also one of the things I love is your encouragement for everyone to be able to get out and experience nature, because predominantly it was, quite difficult for, I suppose I use the words marginalized individuals because it's a huge group of people of color and that just wouldn't, there wasn't a place really for them. And there has been a lot of movement in recent years of some fantastic organizations. I know you mentioned quite a few in your book as well that are just much more open and inclusive and allowing far more people to be able to get out and experience the natural world in communities where they feel safe and are nurtured and accepted as well.
I mean, absolutely. There's New York City is a melting pot, and one place that I'm really feel privileged here is we actually have a ton of, I mean, first of all, in Brooklyn where I live, when you go out bird watching, you see bird watchers of all, shapes, colors, genders, whatever. I mean, just it's a place where it's not surprising to see that, run into women and black
Yeah.
people and queer people, and then of course for those who are looking for communities there, tons of organizations have popped up specifically to help nurture folks who are interested in nature, not just birds, from all walks of lives and backgrounds. And so, and that's something that, of course, I need to highlight in New York because it's such a melting pot. It really is a place that, is an awesome place to visit or experience that form of community. Now, of course, it's not the case everywhere,
Yeah.
but at least I hope that folks, by reading the book, can get a sense of like it's possible.
Yeah.
There's and if you look at the kinds of naturalists I feature, it's not like I was like, okay, I need to pick like marginalized people. It's like, no, I just truly was like the first 10 people that I thought of, five of them ended up being the naturalists I feature in the book. So that's just how it works in New York. It's a really wonderfully diverse place. We have a wonderfully diverse group of people who are naturalists here, often who are doing some of the most interesting, nature and wildlife work. And I really want people to understand it can be that way, right? If you
Yeah.
can't be it unless you see it. So obviously the book was a good opportunity to show it.
Yeah, I think it's really important because I know in the UK as well we've had some a rise in recent years of communities that are specifically catering to Black people, persons of color, women as well who you know might have struggled as well. I think sometimes women feel a bit unsafe going to these sort of um nature havens in urban areas on their own. So when you can come together in communities and things, it does it serves several purposes, not just safety and learning, but also just having that experience of community as well. Because being in an urban environment can sometimes be quite lonely, can't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Before I was a naturalist in New York City, so I've lived in New York for, all but 2 years of my life. And the thing is that it's sad that it's a city with so many people, and yet it can be so hard to make individual connections.
Yeah.
And but then when I started bird watching, it was like I see the same people out every day and started making some, really close friends. And it started to bring out this feeling that you really only have in college, right? In college, you're just walking around and there's just people and you know
Yeah.
them and
Yeah.
you run into them and you're having like really positive human interactions and connections almost every day. You lose that when you move to New York, but as a birder, just this morning I walked in to my kind of regular nature observing patch, and the first person I saw was the person, one of my good friends, and then the second person I saw was like my main nature mentor who kind of taught me a lot of the things I know, and then we were just walking around, the three of us, and then it's always like that. Any park I go to, people see you with binoculars or with, taking pictures of plants, and they'll stop you and ask you. And then these communities arise both by creation or naturally. And then you can start a club of birders, and the same group can go out every week, or you can join an existing club like the Brooklyn Bird Club or the Feminist Bird Club, the Queer Birders, Outdoor Afro, some of these amazing groups, and then they're your friends. Like I
Yeah.
text my birder beer group chat and I say, hey everybody, well, when are we getting out for drinks? And then you know you're all united by this like shared interest. And then, one of the things I've noticed most is, especially somebody who, when you're younger and you graduate college, most of your friends are in their 20s. But, when I had my birthday this year, the age range was, the youngest person was like 25 and the oldest person was 70. And
Yeah.
it's as if we're with all of our best friends, that
Yeah.
the age is like the least important part of what we're connected over. And it's really fantastic.
Yeah, I think that's really lovely to hear that, Ryan, because it sounds like it's the sort of the thread that I'm getting is it's just like enriched your ways enriched your life in just numerous ways that you just couldn't even have imagined when you first thought, oh, actually I'm gonna like get into birding. And it's just, opened up all of these doors of connections and people and collaboration. And I think that's one of the beautiful things, isn't it? Is it's nature just provides you this opportunity, and then the people that you connect with, and I think it's you connect with as you learn to connect with the natural world, you sort of reconnect with yourself and you can connect with other people, and it just does open up these beautiful relationships as well.
Absolutely. And I think I want to add that, we're talking about birding because birding was my primary door to nature. And of course, like it's probably the easiest, lowest barrier to entry nature hobby. But these communities exist beyond birding. I mean, one of the most interesting New York City organizations is the New York Mycological Society. So, the Mushroom Club.
Yeah.
And it was founded by, the famous experimental composer John Cage, most famous for his piece of music, which is just like 4 minutes of silence, but also just tons of really interesting music. And it started as like this almost anarchist organization, like this sort of like there's no rules type of organization, but has really blossomed into this very like community-driven, influential, kind of almost radical organization with some really amazing people in charge. And just such amazing educational walks. They take people out and they all explore together. And they have both microscopes that you can rent or borrow, so you can look at stuff up close. And I believe they also have DNA sequencing kits that you can rent, because sometimes identifying a fungus requires that level
Yeah.
of detail. And the fact that this organization exists and is doing outreach and regularly reaching out to folks and regularly hosting kind of amazing programming is just super cool. And that's I hope to see organizations like that pop up everywhere because of how valuable their presence is simply for appreciating this very underappreciated facet of of New York City nature.
Yeah, I love that because in your book you do cover like all of the aspects in your sort of we mentioned your species kind of catalogue in the middle, but you have got lichens and fungi and plants, and then obviously moving on to insects and birds and amphibians, and that's the thing, isn't it? It's like it's finding I mean, I did a biological recording course a while ago at one of the early rewilding sites in the UK, NEP, and we were sort of advised like find what you're passionate about and then like focus on that. So whether it's like wildflowers or birds or fungi or insects, it could be moths or and just there's just this there's going to be a community that you can kind of get involved with and get excited about and just follow what lights you up really. If that's not birds, then there's plenty of other aspects of nature that you can explore and enjoy even in the urban environment.
Yeah, you can look at anything the way that you'd look at a bird. I mean, the way that birders look at nature is they just want to see all of the different ones, right? They go outside, they want to see a new species of bird. They've never seen this species in this park before. It's all about the list.
Yeah, the life
But
list.
the life list, or if you've seen too many, then it becomes the park list or the year
Yeah.
list or whatever. But you could keep a list of everything. I've lists, iNaturalist makes it really easy to document all of your different sightings. I keep track of especially my leps and my odes, so butterflies, moths, and dragonflies and
Yeah.
damselflies. And we don't have quite as much diversity of those in New York City, but there's still solid like I've seen probably 20, 25 species in my local cemetery of butterfly, probably several hundred species of moth in New York City, and then dragonfly, probably 12 or 13. And then it keeps you attuned, a new one might show up. These animals have wings and they can show
Yeah.
up in unexpected places. And I've been documenting this kind of rare dragonfly species that's threatened in New York City. But I found one at my local cemetery, right?
Oh
And
wow.
there's a big, beautiful pond, and now we know that that's a dragonfly that lives there. We haven't determined if it's breeding there or if it just stops by, but every looking at things through the eye of a bird watcher and this sort of detailed species level understanding of the world can really shed light on any group of animals that you might be excited about.
Yeah, I think the I'm gonna have to ask you to share some because obviously the final part of your book is you talk about like your sort of you is a field guide for people to like you explain like places that they can go in New York City and you sort of kind of walk them through the walks that they can do and what they might see in that area and you also lead you still lead bird tours yourself, don't you, as well?
Yep. Yeah, I
Yeah.
lead. I call them nature tours now because if I call them a bird tour and a birder comes and I talk mainly about bugs the whole time, they don't like it. So I lead nature tours for a bird watching organization.
But But do you want to share some of your like favorite spots in New York City? I don't know, or one or two spots that you really like, you enjoy, and you'd like to promote. I mean, you've got lots in your book, and I encourage everyone to go and read your book, even if you've never been to New York City or you're thinking about going or you live there, even better. But if you'd like to share some, that'd be lovely.
Sure. So I'll give you one exclusive that I don't include in the book, and then I'll give my favorite from the book. So the exclusive is that there is a train viaduct in Uptown Manhattan that is just blanketed with cliff ferns. So
Oh,
ferns that would only
wow.
grow on rocky slopes in
Oh,
mountains.
amazing.
And what's probably happening is that the train is bringing these fern spores down, and then the ferns find this sort of brick
Yeah.
viaduct and think, oh, this is fine. And then, so it's covered, it's got maybe, 5 to 10 species of uncommon
Oh, wow.
plant. And if you look at all of them, you'll sometimes pick out a pretty rare one. So it's quite a beautiful place. Of course, I don't include it in the book because I really try and focus on like accessible and,
Yeah.
the kind of thing that won't get you in trouble. And because this one is just on the side of a highway or like a main road, whenever you do this, there's always somebody screaming at you out the window. A lot of New Yorkers, hey, what the hell are you doing over here? Why are you going my way? So that's it's amazing, but be safe. And then the other one is, oh man, there's a lot. Okay, so just over the Verrazano Bridge in Staten Island, and accessible by the Staten Island Railway is this intriguing little park that is kind of like a weedy, overgrown place called Serpentine Commons. And at first, it doesn't really look like much. It kind of just looks like weeds and shrubs. But then when you get to this, you hike up this trail and get to this big opening, and not only is it like a fantastic view over New York City, but it actually is this threatened habitat where a endangered milkweed that doesn't grow very
Oh,
many
wow.
places lives. And if you go in June and July, you can find this beautiful green comet milkweed. It's a gorgeous little plant, and it's there because it specializes in these serpentine bedrock. So if you actually
Okay.
look closely, all of the rock here is serpentinite. So serpentine is like a green bedrock, and it's kind of weird looking, and so the ground is covered in this serpentine, and this special serpentine specialist plant grows there, and it's just the kind of thing that you really can't see a lot of places. And maybe there's like one other good example of it in New York State, and further south you see more of the plant, at least because it is a little
Yeah.
more general south of here. But just like the fact that we have some of these like threatened rare communities that you like, this isn't like a threatened rare community just because it's in New York, right? This is a threatened and rare community because it is
Such a
threatened and rare.
specialist, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
global. I mean,
Yeah.
globally, it's a rare threatened community,
Yeah.
and like I said, just off the Staten Island Railway, and and then there's a nice little hiking trail that you can go around and feel like you're, bushwhacking through the jungle. But it's, I really like it there, and I think it kind of shows off that, the city actually does have a ton of hidden gems that are ecologically valuable, not just because they happen to be in New York City, but they're actually valuable on their own.
Yeah, I love that. And I think the first thing that you mention in the sort of the more the field guide section is actually just to start on your street as well. Like, and it's sometimes it's one of those pieces of advice that is like seems so simple and obvious, but it is so often overlooked, isn't it? It's sort of like you feel like you've got to go out to a destination. Like I'm going birding today, and I've got to like go, and it's like actually you can just step outside your front door and be aware of what's around you. And I think you mentioned like sort of lichens and mosses, and you mentioned those lovely ferns on the building, and the it's when you just I think it comes down to slowing down, doesn't it? And being aware and just sort of actually just being conscious of where you are and looking around you is really the first step to it.
Yeah, I mean, I really wanted to emphasize the street piece because so my first apartment, or my last apartment rather, was in a neighborhood that kind of is a unassuming Brooklyn neighborhood. It's called Park Slope, so it's a nice neighborhood. It's got a lot of trees. I was living sort of on the edge of it in an area that was like a little more developed, and but I had over maybe I had 120, 130 species of bird that I had seen
Wow.
just from my apartment building. I put out I have like moth lights in a sheet, so I put out some lights to see what moths would show up. And I had this like super uncommon moth show up that was only the third or fourth time it had been seen in New York City, and it just came to my backyard, and it's this gorgeous, like kind of mossy brown green moth with bright orange underwings that it hides
Oh,
below
wow.
its top wings. And, of course, like squirrels built a nest in our backyard. Interesting, like I had a possum once. And so, I mean, it's not just that like you should start observing your block because it's a great place to get started. It's there, but in all honesty, you actually have a chance of finding interesting wildlife simply by walking around in New York City. That's just what happens when you take a major city and put it in the middle of like a major migratory pathway and what was formerly once one of the most biodiverse places in the eastern United States.
Yeah, I think it sounds amazing. I mean, one of the things that I kind of didn't think about was the impact of the marine environment and the fact that you mentioned that you can see whales from your beaches, and it's like, that kind of like blew my mind as well. It's like you're in this huge like metropolis, and like, you sort of think, oh, looking for the smaller things, but actually like you can go out and there's whales and things that are kind of like on your doorstep as well.
In fact, New York City has a whale watching company that leads regular tours out of Sheepshead Bay, which is easily accessible by subway, South Brooklyn, and these tours they always see a whale, and if you don't see a whale, they give you a discount to take the next trip because there's humpback whales. They use New York. The area around the city is an important feeding area, and they we see them, and they'll keep track of the individual whales. They're usually not breeding, but they're coming rather to feed and then returning to their breeding grounds,
Yeah.
later in the year. But not just whales. I mean, dolphins are a regular sight from the beach. If you just sit in the summer and watch the shore for an hour or two, you'll almost definitely see dolphins. The winter, we have harbor seals. It is really a city on the ocean, and also we're starting to have a lot cleaner habitats than we did before. And so wildlife that may not have been present in the city in the past century, we're starting to get stuff that's coming back that's, oysters, for example. The oyster was an incredibly important animal in the New York City harbor, but with all of the shipping and industry and pollution,
Yeah.
they ended up losing quite a lot of them. And there's this great project, the Billion Oyster Project, that I talk about in the book that's working to reseed oysters throughout the New York harbor. And now we see oysters washing up on the beach. Now, I wouldn't eat those oysters
No.
just because I can't guarantee that any cleanliness of New York's water, but they're there, and we see tons of it. Sturgeon is another one that I saw. Well, I've never seen one alive, but I've seen them dead a couple times, wash up on the shore, and just it's an incredible place for the sea. And I actually do also this maybe doesn't count because it's certainly not New York City, but the Hudson River, which is the main river in New York, it actually carves a canyon that's like 100 miles offshore.
Yeah.
And you can see, like, if you look at these bathymetry maps, these seafloor maps, you can see this canyon kind of go from New York City and then trace out all the way out to this enormous, like, half-mile deep sea canyon. And it's now one of the more important marine wildlife areas. And so the whale watching company will lead tours out to the marine canyon.
Oh, wow.
Uh, and they spot just incredible things. I mean, critically endangered whales. And, we saw 10% of the world's population of the North Atlantic right whale, which is a very
Oh,
rare
wow.
whale,
Yeah.
just all together in the canyon. We've seen Atlantic puffins, very
I think
famous
you
north of
mentioned
here,
sea turtles as well, didn't you? Yeah.
sea
It's-
turtles, endangered birds. I mean, and it's just it's an overnight trip, just 100 miles southeast of the city. But it's because of the city's influence that this
Yeah.
canyon is there. So I feel sort of kinship and connection
Yeah.
with this deep canyon.
Oh, it's just I just love it. Like I love your excitement and enthusiasm for your environment and just the amazing like wildlife and the kind of gifts, I guess, that you find around every corner and it's just I mean, even there you're talking now and you're saying, like cities kind of historically get quite a bad rap for, their pollution and, their impact on the environment. But actually what you're saying there and some of the things you share in the book are, there is change coming. You mentioned like pollution that's being kind of addressed, and you used to have a lot of algal blooms, and the area that's affected by that has been shrinking. And I think you also mentioned like the reflective glass and how there's been legislation passed to make sure that new developments have the glass that is less likely for birds to have impact strikes on it. So there is a lot of positives coming through as well, of like actually how we're starting to adapt our urban environments to be a bit more welcoming for nature as well.
Yeah, I mean, while I don't want to paint like the most rosy picture, at the very least, what I'll say is that there is an increased knowledge of the fact that, this is not a place that's devoid of wildlife, that wildlife actually needs to live here and uses the city because it's very important, and that we do need to conserve, to find ways to live in harmony with them. And so the New York City Bird Alliance, which is the organization with which I lead most of my nature tours, they are just working to advocate for some incredible legislation, as you said, for lights out as well as windows. So the city lights can act as a bit of a tractor beam for
Yeah.
birds and insects, which then, they are forced into a habitat that's not quite as good for them and then might not successfully migrate to where they need to go. And then they show up and then they fly into a glass window and die. So the fact that we have this advocacy to kind of get safe passage for our migrating creatures as they pass through the city is really amazing. And then there's, of course, smaller community level organizations that are working to revitalize the wetland areas around some of the formerly really industrial areas. I think there's also this recognition that, not only is like nature has the opportunity to help clean, right?
Yeah.
Bioremediation is a huge
Yeah.
thing right now. There are plants that we know that by planting them, they could help revitalize a place. And so there are organizations that are working to do that around places like the Gowanus Canal and Newtown Creek, which, if you're not from New York, these are like some of the most like infamously disgusting places in the world, like super fun sites where, everybody's like, oh, you see, they're cleaning up the black mayonnaise at the
Yeah.
bottom of the
Yeah.
Gowanus Canal. And, but now there's organizations that are like, how do we use nature and how do we revitalize these places so that, to help clean up? And just the other day, I mean, it's actually great timing. My friend and I were talking, and they found this endangered sparrow, this salt marsh specialist sparrow called the salt marsh sparrow, whose population is, critically, declining and super threatened by climate change and by human development. And one was just hopping around Newtown Creek, which is like one of these disgusting Superfund sites. But clearly, the work that they're doing is working because
Yeah.
a salt marsh sparrow can show up there. Birders like will like drop what they're doing and go try and find salt marsh sparrows because they know how rare they are. And
Yeah.
the fact that there are actually places where they're showing up and they actually breed in the city. That's one of the species that I purposely spotlight, even though they're quite rare. There's actually two or three marshes where this endangered species is successfully breeding. So just incredible that it's around. And while it's not a cakewalk for them yet, I hope that their existence and the fact that some of this stuff can thrive here is impetus for people to want to continue to conserve these species.
Yeah, I think that's what's so lovely about your book, Ryan, as well, is, people, you're raising awareness of what's out there so that people can begin to feel connected to it and they can get involved and advocate for nature. But equally, like it has this impact on people who aren't the people that are doing that. When you clean up these sites, it has this ripple effect for the communities around them. They just, have a nicer environment to live in and be in themselves as well. So it's again, it's like this win-win for everyone, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think that nature and biodiversity is way more than just an environmental issue. It's really a people issue.
Yeah.
Because, and of course, we can talk about how the areas that are like dumpy and super fun sites are often correlated with the areas where sort of the most impoverished or marginalized people
Yeah.
live in cities. And so the fact that we can use nature as a way of making people aware of those, these, which are ultimately social justice issues,
Yeah.
um, and feel, for the humans who have to live in these areas and realize that it's kind of like decisions that are being made decades and centuries ago that are the reason that people have to live worse
Yeah.
lives like that.
Yeah.
And so being able to raise awareness, it's kind of two ways, right? There's, of course, raising awareness with the people with wallets who care and want, to be able to help their neighbors, but also by the New York City Bird Alliance has this wonderful program called NYCHA in Nature. NYCHA is our housing authority. That's kind of they're in charge of the project houses, which is often
Okay.
the lower
Yeah.
income housing in
Yeah.
New York City. And they have a program where they take folks in these project houses out bird watching to show them that even in their little areas of green space around there, they can find some pretty amazing birds. And building that sort of consciousness there can help them advocate for themselves and say,
Yeah.
oh, wait, like, why, as a community member, why are you allowing some of these things to happen? We actually live in such an incredible, biodiverse place. And, you know, helping build that awareness across the entire city, I think is helpful for everybody.
Oh, I love that, Ryan, and I think I'll try and make sure that I put the links to some of the things that you've mentioned in the show notes, as well as obviously your own links and the link to your lovely book that hopefully lots of people will go out and read themselves and share with other people so that it can reach as many people as possible. I guess we're getting to the point that we have to we have to start to wrap up. I feel like I could talk to you for hours and hours, but is there anything that you would like to share just to sort of round off for us?
I suppose I just want to end by saying, this podcast obviously has reached far beyond New York City and, all of the things that I'm saying here. It's amazing that this is true of New York, but a lot of what I'm saying is true of your city as well. If you live in a built up area, you have to start thinking about, is this wildlife habitat? What kind of wildlife lives here? And how can I, what decisions am I making that might impact the wildlife that lives here or beyond here? And I hope that this book, even if you're not from New York City, I think that first of all, please buy it and then come visit New York City. I think it'll be great. But also, use it as an impetus and jumping off point to understand that cities are often really great places to look for wildlife, and some of the rarest or most special animals you might encounter in your area might be in your city. And of course, Timber Press, who published this book, does have a number of other city guides for the United States, at least. But if not, you could be the one who writes it. Start walking around and see what's around, and who knows, maybe you'll find that some weird threatened species only lives in like the weeds next to the garbage dump. Like that's the
Yeah,
kind of stuff that
yeah.
we have. So anyway, and I have my website and my and a link to the book will be in the show notes. But I hope you all enjoy it because I'm just really happy that this exists.
Yeah, I love that, Ryan. I love that it's like there might be someone listening to this who like starts to go out and explore their own urban area, their own city, and then they maybe get together with some of the people that they meet in their city, and then they come together and they write a guide for their own city. I just have this lovely vision of like this it's like this whole movement that could spread across the world and really help to allow more people the opportunity to get connected with wildlife, because it's so important and it's such a gift. It's so, it has so many benefits to both on a personal level and in a community level, as you just mentioned, with the social justice aspect of it, as well as on the environmental level and what we can do to help wildlife and conservation for the future. But it's been really a lovely conversation with you. I've so enjoyed it. It's been fantastic to meet you, and I hope your book reaches lots of people and just encourages them to come and see the amazing diversity that is New York City.
I hope so too. And thank you so much for having me, Fiona. This was a blast. And, I'm always down to talk about the New York City and nature that we have here. So thanks for having me. And, I hope everybody enjoys the book.
Thank you so much for listening to the Nurtured by Nature podcast. I truly hope this conversation has brought some hope and inspiration into your life. I would love to have these messages ripple out across the world. So if you can, please share this episode with your friends. Leave a review on your favourite podcast player and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. I would love to hear from you, so please feel free to connect with me on the links provided in the podcast description. But most importantly, thank you so much for being a part of this journey with me. But don't forget to simply get out there and enjoy the natural world.